Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us this morning to talk about harm reduction, pregnancy, and parenting. My name is Hillary, and I work over at Maine Access Points. And I am so excited and really thankful to be in conversation with Cait Vaughn and Cait Kayla today as they kind of guide us through the work that they do surrounding, supporting people who are pregnant and parents who use drugs. We're gonna start off. They're gonna introduce themselves, and then we're just gonna go into conversation. We have the ability for folks to make comments, to be part of the dialogue. We would love for people to be part of this conversation with us. And so feel free to comment on Facebook, on Twitch, and on YouTube, and we will get to your comments. We'll be sharing some resources as we go along. But yeah, I'm going to kind of be quiet and open the floor up to my dear friends.
Kayla, do you want to introduce yourself first?
Sure. Yeah. So my name is Cait Kayla. I am a previous drug user, and I get to wear a lot of hats in the community as a result of my experiences. I serve on the board for food and medicine, and I'm a birthing doula. I work primarily with moms who use drugs, moms who previously used drugs, or moms in recovery. I have been able to help, along with Cait and other birthing doulas in our state, create like a coalition of doulas that really just focus on ensuring that anybody that wants a doula has access to one. And we know that a lot of demographics, specifically like, BIPOC birthing folks, people who use drugs, people who are low income, typically don't have access to doulas. So I've been happy to be part of that. And yeah, I am also a mom, and I've given birth to a beautiful, she's 4 now, but so I have some experience around that and some, stigma around when I was giving birth to her. That really was the catalyst for me becoming a doula and just wanting to ensure that other folks didn't have the same experience that I had. And I did have like birth support and stuff, which was really great, but I recognize that that's not true for all birthing folks. So yeah, I'm really happy to be here and to be part of this conversation.
Thanks, Kay. I'm Cait. I use she and her. I am a doula. I work with folks for birth, postpartum, and abortion. And I have been a map distributor for a while and have just been doing various harm reduction work and was working in the reproductive rights field and working for an abortion care provider, and started to realize through relationships with folks in my life who use drugs or who are newly in recovery and were pregnant that there was, it became clear to me that this intersection of drug use and pregnancy and parenting and surveillance, that was one of the really pressing reproductive justice issues here in Maine. And so reproductive justice, for folks who don't know, just very briefly, is a movement that was named and established in the mid-90s by Black American women who had been doing all kinds of work in their communities around a whole bunch of issues, and were really inspired by an international conference that talked about reproductive politics from the perspective of human rights, instead of relying on our Constitution, which is so flawed, but saying we have the human right. The framework is we have the human right to have children, to not have children, and to raise our families in safe and sustainable communities, and that we need the power and resources to do that. And so it really gets to more of the fundamental issues that make parenting so difficult, particularly for folks of color, low-income people, queer families, and other marginalized folks, like folks who use drugs and have been criminalized or incarcerated. So I became really affected when there was a story up in Bangor near where Kayla lives, where there was a mother who was being very publicly prosecuted and kind of torn apart in the press because her small child had found their way into some of the drugs that were in the home. And the sort of immediate nasty mentality that people took and the extreme judgment really made it clear to me that this is like a very big issue in our state. And so I became a doula and started working with folks who use drugs. And it is the like greatest honor of my life to get to move alongside these incredible folks in our community. So Kayla and I are just going to share a bit about like what we've seen, what we've learned, and we can share some resources along the way, because this is increasingly becoming something that harm reductionists and people who are abolitionists across the country are more and more paying attention to, the ways that pregnancy makes people particularly vulnerable, and the way that the drug war is not just about locking people up, but also about family separation, and it's about obstetric violence. And so the drug war has reached so deep into this part of our lives. So so I'm excited to talk with Kayla, because we talk about this stuff all the time. This is how we became friends. So really lovely to be here. Kay, I wonder if we can start just kind of like really broadly talking about, like, I guess I think about the language that is used now to talk about folks who use drugs and are pregnant. We talk about substance exposed infants, right? That's like the PC term that everybody's using now. And I think what's important to acknowledge is that, and this was shared with me from Indra Lucero from Elephant Circle, a birth justice organization, but they had shared, like, you know, what is considered a substance and exposure has changed over time. And so acknowledging that we are living in an environment that has toxic air, that has lead in water, that we're dealing a lot with PFAS, forever chemicals in Maine, that there are many things that we are exposed to in utero that could affect us. But the only substance that the state seems interested in sort of regulating around pregnancy is drug use and alcohol. You know, this is substance that are considered legal in some places, like marijuana, alcohol, and also any other what they would consider a drug. Those are the only substances they seem to care about our children being exposed to. And so just to acknowledge how ridiculous that is when we're living on a planet that we are making increasingly unlivable for all of us. So I just feel like it's always important to say that. And I don't know if you have anything to add to that, Kay.
Yeah, I think like the first thing that comes to my mind is the fact that there is not really so if a person that uses drugs, specifically, actually, really all drugs, even though, you know, someone that you might use methamphetamine or crack would start on MAT, and MAT would be like methadone or Suboxone or Subutex, and that's considered the gold standard of care, right? So like a woman or a birthing person could go through their entire pregnancy, you know, being told by their primary care physician or their OBGYN that, you know, you're making the safest choice for your baby, you are doing exactly what you need to do, and having, you know, potentially, and not in all situations, but by some people, having, you know, life breathed into them around that. And then it seems like once the child comes earthside, suddenly you know, there's a child protective service worker that's there within 24 hours, very often after a traumatic birth or being in labor for 30 hours or having an emergency C-section, right? So that birthing person has just, you know, done something phenomenal and brought a child earthside, and now are having to relive, you know, really all of their most significant traumas, because the child protective service worker goes through an investigative 30-day period where they're asking about all incarcerations, all times have you been to detox or any type of treatment facility. So you're being asked to relive all of the most graphic moments of your life while you're holding your like tiny baby in your arms and just trying to like learn how to potentially body feed or, you know, care for your child and love on your child. And in a lot of spaces, like, you know, if you have like the typical family, right, like we create space in our society for that family to like bond and grow and be able to like have space, you know, hold space for them, right? And that's not the case typically for people that use drugs. Like they aren't allowed to have that time to just be with their child. And so a time that should be very like inspiring and amazing and memorable now becomes something that is anxiety ridden, traumatizing, scary, right? And we know that like a birthing person could find out that they're pregnant, be using drugs or not be using drugs, and decide that MAT is the right way to go for them, and potentially do everything right through their entire pregnancy, right? Like not take their medication as prescribed, show up to every prenatal appointment, you know, and feel really good about like their birthing process. And even with all of that said, I have personally witnessed, based on the fact that of stigma and the fact that, you know, this specific birthing people had previous state involvement from previous children years and years before. Even if they did everything right, that does not guarantee that that baby is going to go home with that birthing person. And that's a tragedy, because we know through evidence that if a newborn baby doesn't have skin to skin with, you know, the birthing person, or, you know, mother or father, however they identify, that they can't have proper brain development, right? So like essentially we're creating the next generation of broken people when we do things that we know go against what evidence shows us, right? So I don't know if that's, yeah, I kind of went off on a tangent, but
Tangents are good.
Yeah, right.
You're so right. And just pointing out, like, what it makes me think of, Kayla, is that like the real harm, and we know this as harm reductionists, right? Like drug use may come with risks. Harm often comes from systems, right? And so there is there's a lot of medical research to show that it's pretty inconclusive what the long-term effects of most drugs are on children when their gestational parent uses drugs during pregnancy. There's some evidence to show that there might be, particularly around alcohol, but all of this depends on the frequency of use, the volume of use, and a million other factors. But what we know is that you cannot pull apart the effects of drug use from the effects of being unhoused, of being constantly stressed, of being in an abusive relationship, of not having enough nutrition, of being constantly frightened that you're not going to be able to provide for your child because of this capitalist structure that we live in, and that you're not going to have consistent access to healthcare, right? Because in this country, we don't have consistent access to healthcare. So what feels really important to say at the outset is that I believe the harms of drug use, in my experience accompanying folks through this process, the harm of drug use itself is far outweighed by the harms of a system that views people as unfit to parent, unable to care for a child or make their own decisions about their bodies and their healthcare, and that tries to separate families and often does separate families. And so I think that harm is so much greater, and focusing on this individual, what this individual puts into their body instead of what kind of environment does this individual live in? What kind of resources and support do they have? That is the fundamental problem with the drug war, period, right? And so this is such a particularly violent aspect of the drug war, because you're separating, like you said, newborn infants from their parents, the only thing they've ever known. You know, when a child comes into the world, the only home they've ever known is the body of that person who carried them. And often they're separated very quickly, or they're not able to bond even if they're physically together, because the level of stress is taking away from all that oxytocin, that love hormone that is so good to us and helps with bonding in the first, critical hours of life. So, yeah, I mean, I think we can talk more about like what happens in the hospital, but that's what, your rant inspires mine, that it makes me think like, wow, like the real harm here is these systems that so harshly judge people who use drugs, in moments that should be sacred. And it feels really important to say too that people who are using actively or have used in the past, and that's somewhere in their medical record, when they find out they're pregnant and decide they want to continue a pregnancy, they then have to decide what they're going to disclose to a provider. And I just wanted to talk a bit about that with you, Kayla, because like that is such a hard spot that people are put in.
Yeah. I want to highlight too, like if you are pregnant and you go into a OBGYN appointment, whether you're just finding out or whatever, your first appointment, if you disclose that you, previously used drugs, or you use drugs, or you're on MAT, or, because a lot of times sometimes a disconnect between the MAT provider and the OBGYN, or like you said, if it's on file that you previously used drugs or it's known, that immediately, like in my experience, my OBGYN immediately sent something to the state. So I got something in the mail within 3 days that was talking about like safety around pregnancy. And like, while that probably in my head should have been something that I saw as support, I knew immediately. I was like, okay, so they know. And whether or not I was on MAT, I was going to have a visit from a social worker because of that immediate thing. Right. And it's ironic to me that our culture, like we have this idea in our culture that if a person finds out they're pregnant, that's enough, right? Like to be like, oh, I'm going to stop using drugs. But evidence shows us, and like just reality shows us, that that's just not the case, right? Like pregnancy is actually a time when you're at increased risk for having a recurrence of symptoms, or increased risk for use, because you have, changing hormones, your body is different. Just the concept of being responsible for another human alone is a lot to take on, right? Like that's a lot for us to put on our shoulders. So just the simple fact that you previously used is enough to warrant that initial visit from the social worker. So I always encourage my clients to, first of all, know their rights. If a social worker comes to talk to you, you don't have to go into detail about, it's always good to be respectful to answer the questions, but you don't have to go into detail. You can answer the questions yes or no. You do not have to submit to a urine screen. You can say no to that. You do not have to let anybody in your home. You can say no to that. You can say, I'm really uncomfortable letting people in my safe space. I'm happy to talk to you out here. And it's as sad as our system is set up, it's their job to do this investigation, right? So we don't need to give them the things that they can take a child away from you, right? That's their job. So just knowing your rights, and being empowered through that. Like, I had said to the worker, I said, this is my baby and this is my sacred time, and I'm not going to let you take that from me. So I'm not going to go into detail about like my prison sentence and whatever, and I think also just like helping the client become empowered with like knowing what their hospital, and I think we're going to get into this in a little bit, but knowing what the hospital's protocol is for scoring babies that have neonatal abstinence syndrome. So there's different types of scoring, but just like knowing, calling the hospital first and saying like, this is where I'm planning to birth. Like, am I going to be able to be like housed with my child? Am I going to be able to, am I going to be able to stay with my child at all times? Like, what is your scoring system? and just like kind of going into it, knowing where you're at, and a lot of times, like I remember during my interview after my daughter was born, it was like the way that she was talking to me made me feel really small, right? And like my daughter's father piped up at one point and was like, you should tell her about how you like serve on the board for this, and that you do this, and like you just chaired a meeting, and like all of these things that I did, all of these hats that I wore were just stripped away from me, right? Because I felt like I was this big and I needed to justify the fact that like I had a child, like, that I wasn't allowed to be happy in this moment because I had a past, and, I needed to justify the fact that I was, fit to be her parent. And like when he said that, I was like, wow, you're right. Wait a minute. Like, who are you? Like, you're not the small person that she's making you feel like, and I think just like in a respectful way, just like kind of dispelling the idea that it's okay for those conversations to happen. Like, you're not going to make me feel like this. Like, this is my time. This is my baby, and I'm going to love on this baby,
Yeah. I just like smile because I think of you're just so amazing at advocating for yourself and for your daughter. And I think like that moment where, you had someone remind you, be able to ground you again and who you are. That's part of what I hope to do as a doula, right? For my clients, is that doula work is about accompanying people. It's not about making decisions for folks. It's not like social work. It's not saviorism. It really is like, I'm moving on this path with you, and I'm here to help ground you in who you are and what your strengths are. And it makes me think about too, that people, when they're deciding how hard to push back on this system for new parents who use drugs, or maybe they have other children, they're not new to parenting, but they're in this situation again where they're being scrutinized. I've worked with, so thinking about a client who was just constantly afraid, if I don't do exactly what they're telling me, hospital staff, my providers, is it going to be written up in my chart as I was difficult, I was reckless in my decision making? And so people have to weigh a lot about, and that's based on privilege, right? Like, that's based on what their own comfort level is. Often I think people are, once medical staff view someone as difficult or non-compliant, right? Like, that can really shape their experience. And so one of the things I have done as a doula, when I'm working with folks who use or have used, I often go to prenatal appointments with them. And that's not something I do with all clients, but with people who are poor folks, who have histories of drug use, who have been incarcerated. Like, I will offer to go to these appointments. And part of what I'm trying to signal is like, this person is not alone. This person is deeply thoughtful about their care, and they have someone in their corner. Because I think there's a lot of assumptions that folks who use drugs are always alone or don't have community, which of course is not true. And also that, well, if you're using drugs while pregnant, or you're on MAT or whatever it is, you're not thinking about your pregnancy in this way that everyone else does. And of course you are. You're thinking about, how can I best take care of me and this baby that I'm building with my body, which is a superpower, by the way, like a total superpower to build a human from scratch. And so as a doula, I'm trying to like help people remember, this is a superpower you are exercising, and everything you do for yourself and advocate for yourself those are your first acts of parenting, right? Because taking care of you is taking care of this little one. And so around testing, I want to say that we put in the chat like a resource around birthing folks' rights that I encourage folks to look at. But, if providers are trying to do urinary screens, UAs, during appointments, one of the things that happened with a client of mine is those screens were not talked about. They were just my client was just being told, we're going to screen your urine. And so as a doula, one of the things I was able to do is slow down and create a space for a conversation between my client and their provider to say, can we talk about the purpose of these? Can we talk about what's going to happen? And can we talk about why the way you did this felt shaming to this client, right? Like it did not feel good. Because from her perspective, she was like, I just told you that I'm not using. Now you're going to screen me and it feels like I'm already not being believed. From the provider's perspective, what was shared was, we want to help you build a positive record of clean screens because we know you're going to get this visit from the social worker. So there was some good intention from that provider, but it was not communicated to my client, right? So being able to slow down and create a space to ask questions made it so that she could share her feelings about, like, this felt stigmatizing to me and I don't like it and I want to be trusted. And the provider was able to say, oh, I thought I was being helpful and in fact I was being oppressive and shaming you. And then we were able to make a plan going forward that felt right, so if you can absolutely refuse that testing, it does feel important for folks to know that there may be some assumptions made about why you're refusing that testing, right?
Yeah, true.
But having a conversation with your provider about what's the purpose of this, those are some of your rights, to be able to talk about it and be fully informed about your care. And sometimes bringing someone with you is the only way that you'll feel confident enough to do that. And folks might not have a doula, but you can have anyone you really trust talk about the conversations you want to have and go to those appointments with you to decide who's there with you. And you get to decide whether you have cervical checks, right? Like during those appointments or not. You get to decide a whole bunch of things, but I know when we go into medical context, sometimes even me as someone who advocates for others, I get small in those spaces. So what's going to help you move in your full power in those spaces, right? Because you're acting as a parent in those moments. Those are the initial acts of parenting.
Yeah.
And I wonder, Kate, if you want to talk a bit more about just what people, you were mentioning some things about scoring and stuff, and I'm just wondering if you want to talk more about, like, when people give birth in hospitals, what's some of the stuff that is typically done, right? And how can they advocate around some of that?
Sure. So there's a couple different scoring systems that are used. I think a lot of hospitals are moving away from the Finnegan scoring system, but I know that some of them are still using that. And that is a scoring system. I think every 4 hours, a nurse or a doctor will come in and check the baby for specific cues. And then based on those cues, the baby will get a score. And then the higher the score, if it's like consistently high, then they can warrant like giving, medication over and above what was the baby was getting while in utero. And things that they check for are if the baby is excessively yawning, if the baby is excessively sneezing, if the baby has tremors, is the baby able to, eat food, and is the baby able to be, if the baby starts crying, is the baby able to be consoled within 10 minutes? And knowing that going into it is really important because, I've seen folks before like have a score that was like significantly higher than the one before, right? And then, the birthing person says, well, wait a minute, like you just gave my baby a bath and you scored when the baby was cold and not with me and I was sleeping and I didn't even know you were scoring. Like, can we please do a rescore? And then they brought baby to the birthing person's chest and it was totally different, right? So like there are circumstances where you're allowed to say like, yeah, my baby yawned because my baby's tired, right? Like it's okay to advocate and say like, no, I really think this is a time when we should rescore. And doing so in like a respectful way very often will allow that space to be created. And at the very least for the person that's scoring to kind of take a step back and say, wow, maybe this person is right. And not to say that medical interventions are bad, but I think that, like Cait was saying, just the birthing person is probably going to know better than anybody else how that baby is doing, right? And so taking that power away is not only like dishonoring to the birthing person, but very often it's just like not the standard of care that the baby needs, right? Like, yeah, I would like you to put my baby on my chest so that he or she can sleep, and he or she will be fine as long as they're with me, And then the other type of scoring is eat, sleep, console. And that is the evidence, like the current evidence-based practice, which is awesome because it allows the birthing person and the baby to stay together, to be able to room in so if a baby has or is exposed in utero, considered to be exposed in utero, even though all babies are, right? Because where do we draw the line? Like caffeine, nicotine, there's so many different things that we're exposed to during pregnancy, right? But so if a baby is considered to have neonatal abstinence syndrome, then there's a mandatory 5-day stay in the NICU where the baby is scored. And with hospitals that use eat, sleep, console, allow the birthing person and the child to stay together, which is huge. And I mean, that's, like I said before, that's evidence-based, right? We know that that's going to help baby develop in the way that they should. And I'm trying to think what else is important here. Do you have anything else to add, Cait?
Well, I just think about when we talk about scoring, right? Like this is how providers are assessing the state of that baby. But really what it feels like is that the birthing person is being scored and graded.
Yes.
So just to say that, like, those assessments matter because that's information that's now going to be shared with the state, right? So Child Protective Services, because of a federal law called CAPTA, they're mandated to report any substance exposure. And then while you're in the hospital, folks are gathering all of this data that they can then use the way they want to. So the surveillance feeling just really sucks. And I just want to like name that like it really disrupts a natural process of bonding that is super important for development. So parents feel like they're the ones being scored, right? And what I'll also say is that people during labor and immediately postpartum might need to be given a bunch of different medications. So if folks have a cesarean birth, a belly birth, that's a major abdominal surgery. So then someone needs pain medication. They need they may need their regular medications as well. And so suddenly a lot of folks, what I've seen is in the immediate postpartum period, they're on this cocktail of really intense drugs, and they're having drastic hormonal shifts that come immediately postpartum. And so that's the vulnerable window they're being assessed by a caseworker and hospital staff. And if you're trying to body feed and you've got this whole cocktail of medications in your body, the babies are sleepy because they are being drugged.
Right.
And so, and then that is like seen as, oh, this is what was done during pregnancy. And it's like, well, I've seen folks be given Subutex, ketamine, muscle relaxers, all in the same 24-hour period while trying to pump and breastfeed their babies. Yeah, the baby's sleepy. The baby's getting some amount
Mom's sleepy, right? Or birthing person sleepy, yeah.
Right. So just to say that, it really, I really feel strongly that it's unethical to do these assessments, during that immediate postpartum window. I think that is just a sign of how the drug war is really dismissing what's evidence-based, what's best, and getting people at a particularly vulnerable moment where they haven't even figured out with their provider, what's the medication I need to be on now, right? They haven't even recovered a little bit from whatever kind of labor and birth they experienced. And so there's a lot
Yeah.
set up against us. And there, like you're saying, there's a lot that we can do to also show up for each other and to advocate.
Yeah, you just reminded me too. I think it's important to highlight the fact that very frequently moms that are on a medication while they're pregnant, because of the increase in blood volume, it's very typical to need an increase in whatever medication that they're on. And that doesn't mean anything other than their body's different, right? Like we're creating a human. So that is totally okay. Dose stability is very important during pregnancy. And I've seen like situations where mom will say, or a birthing person will say, I don't understand why my baby is scoring so high. I was only on 3 milligrams my whole pregnancy. I never used and really that it has nothing to do with how much you're on. Like, you could be on, it's just that's not, there's so many factors that play into it. Right. So like just encouraging birthing folks to just remember that that you've done everything that you need to do to keep your baby healthy and safe. And like, we're continuing to make sure that happens. And I mean, I think having conversations in front of providers is important too, just like highlighting that and saying not that you need to justify, you ever need to justify yourself, but in a system where it's justified to tear families apart, it's good to have those conversations and just like let people know what's been going on stuff. Yeah.
We have a question in the chat box that I think is an important one. So do you fear that these mandatory scores can prevent people who use drugs from seeking and maintaining prenatal care?
Yeah. I mean, I think not only do I fear it, I see it, right? Like it happens. All the time there's situations where birthing or pregnant folks will not even see a doctor until like 30 weeks pregnant or whatever, because they know what's to come, right? Like, so yeah, it's a fear, and it's unfortunately been validated in many situations. The systems that we have currently do keep people oppressed and keep people suffering in silence. Like Cait said, like the most important thing for anybody, right? Like not even just birthing folks, is just to have connection, right? Like to have community. And I think to kind of reiterate what you said is just showing up for people and like showing the people that might be in positions of power where they can stigmatize, like, this person does have a lot of people that care about them. Like there's a lot of people that will show up, like, we're here. And the most amazing, phenomenal, like creative, awe-inspiring people I've ever met in my life, right? Or people that are incarcerated, people that use drugs, people that are low income, like all of the demographics that are statistically stigmatized are actually like the most effing amazing people in the world, right? So just like showing up for each other is, I think, really important.
Yes, and that is such an important question, Joan, because while we're talking about all of these harms of, these systems, we know that getting prenatal care as early on in pregnancy as possible is a really important protective factor for folks. It's one of the ways that you really can know what actions can I take to make this pregnancy as healthy as it can be for me in my circumstances. And so I want people to get prenatal care. And it's proven that it makes a big impact on the health outcomes for that person and their child. And at the same time, it feels really important for people to go in knowing what their rights are and how that does put them on a particular track. And that does mean for certain they're going to have a amount of intervention from CPS around their child. I've seen that happen. I've seen it has happened, right? So the thing to do, I think, is for people, if there's any way to bring someone with them early on in prenatal care, that people can help them have a conversation with their provider and say, all right, I want to talk about are my concerns, and just lay that out from the get-go, because I want people to be making informed decisions about what they disclose and what they don't. And to know that there are millions of things you can do to care for yourself in your pregnancy. Like drinking a lot of water. It seems really simple, but drinking a lot of water, sleeping as much as one can, trying to eat as much as one can. These are things that are really, for a lot of people, these are daily struggles, right? And when people realize like that has a big effect on the health of their pregnancy, and maybe I can control pieces of that, let's focus their attention on what they can do, right? And I would say speaking lovingly to oneself and having people around you who encourage you and protect your joy around pregnancy, those are protective factors, right? And that's what you're saying is exactly right, Kayla. Like, unity is our greatest defense, right, against all of these things. Because when people feel that they're going through this alone, they're much more likely to give in to the idea that these systems have about them. But we want to keep centering the assessment of this person that really matters. and like the people they're in community with who know them.
Yeah, so true. I think like any person that's a parent, if you're a good parent, you experience guilt, whether or not you've used drugs in your life or not, right? So you add the fact that you've used drugs or any of the stigmas that go along with birthing, and like we already know, like all of those things are already going through our head at all times, right? Like we know what we've done wrong, so that stuff doesn't need to be highlighted. I don't need to be reminded about any of that. So, but like, I cannot tell you the amount of times where, I've had just different things happen in my life where I start to like adopt those ideals, right? Where I'm like, well, maybe they're right. Maybe I should just like sign over my rights. Maybe I'm not fit for this. Like, and all of those stigmas eventually, when we hear them enough, become internalized. So it is pivotal to have people in your corner that are just constantly reminding you like who you are. Like, no, you are a great mom. Like you're Trinity's only mom, you're Trinity's only like parent or whatever. So I just think like, as much as I've already like said that, it's just so important that we remind folks like who they are, who they have in their corner, like, how much work they've already done. Like you should already be so proud of yourself. You created a human, you created life, you brought another person earthside. Like that is like phenomenal, in and of itself. And just like the things that we're up against, and still being able to maintain joy and being able to maintain connection to our child and learn how to body feed and learn how to like feed our child for what's best for them. Like through all of those systems like that, those type of people are heroes, really,
Yeah. Yes, I will say like the folks who have allowed me to be part of their birthing journeys, their pregnancy journeys, like are folks who have used drugs, who do use drugs, those have been some of the sacred experiences of my life. And because I've just witnessed how motivated people are to care for themselves once they know that they are building another person, right? And to also say that one of the ways I think to think about this is, like I always reiterate, if you're thinking something toxic about yourself, if you're like placing judgment on yourself, imagine like you have this life that's growing and they say like everything you think about your baby, right? Well, I think about that in terms of showing ourselves compassion. As we do that, we are like sending that also through our bloodstream, through our connection. And that's maybe a little like spiritual, but I really think that matters. That remember that you're talking like that about that child, and like like really starting to think, like making this massive life transition before a child has been born, to say like, oh, like I'm going to be somebody's parent. That means like I'm going to love myself, and that I deserve care, that I deserve to be built up and not broken down. And so we need a lot of people to be mirroring and reflecting back to people who are pregnant and using drugs, who are parenting and using drugs, that you're capable. You're capable. You are uniquely qualified to care for this life, right? And so another thing that I think is so like most people, I don't know, when I grew up, I'll say like I grew up in a community where people just had lots of kids, and nobody went to like birthing classes or childbirth classes, or it was just kind of like this community information was passed along about having kids, and it wasn't formalized. And increasingly, it feels like this industry around pregnancy that you have to do this long list of steps to be able to be qualified. So I think all of that stuff, of course, costs money, takes time, takes like, and you can be entering spaces and find that they're not really made for you, right? And so I think part of this is like one of the ways we can reduce harm is by like reminding people that all of that is manufactured, okay? And like, and also what kind of education or support will lift you up, right? And one of the things that I share with folks, because I'm a childbirth educator as well, is that during pregnancy, there are cells that cross over the placenta and cross out from the baby into that gestational parent bloodstream. And they have found cells from that pregnancy in people's brains, heart later in life. And this is a beautiful thing that we, what that means is that a person who gives birth is forever biologically changed by that pregnancy, and a little bit of that child is always in their body for the rest of their lives. And I share this in part because I have worked with people who are not able to stay with their children, right? Their children taken by the in foster care have had their rights terminated. And one of the things I always say is like, you are forever like changed, and that child is forever with you, and you are whether they're with you or not, physically, like in your arms, because they're literally in your body. But you are forever in their body, right? Like you made them. And I think like things like that, they're just little reframes to bring people some solace, right? Because we have to fight the drug war on all fronts. We have to take down these systems. We have to organize, and also we have to bring each other peace and solace and care in the meantime on the way there. And so, what is going to like reassure those parents that what they have done is enormous, and it matters. Whatever the state decides, they don't have to take that, right? We can hold it. We can hold a difference.
Yeah, and I just think like we don't ever, like, we can never measure or gauge how strong, like how impactful showing up for people is, right? Like, I think about the different times in my life or in my parenting journey where people that care about me have showed up for me and like reminded me who I am and what kind of a parent I am, and like how different my life would be if I had given in to what society wanted me to, right? Like what the stigma was, like, oh, you're not fit, you're not, and like I made chowder last night with my 4-year-old and like was teaching her about how to measure things. And like, I just like think about those times, and she got sent home last week with like a thing that said, I got caught doing something nice. Like I was helping my friends. And one of my friends said like, that's because she has a mom that like loves on her and shows her like how to be kind to people, and like, I just think about how different both my daughter and my life would be if I had given into those like ideas that I wasn't enough, that I should just give up, that like someone else could give her a better life, right? Like nobody nobody can parent better than the parent, right? Like nobody knows the inside of my heartbeat besides my daughter. Nobody will ever hear like what that sounds like besides like somebody that's been inside my body. And that's true for all of us, right?
That got me right there. Like
I know. I'm like,
that feels like a really perfect place to kind of stop for now. I know we could talk together, but that just feels like a perfect place to.
Agreed.
yeah.
Thank you both so much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It's just such a gift to listen to you, and I'm so thankful for you every day of my life.
I'm thankful for you both.
Yeah, I'm so grateful for folks who showed up to be in this
Yeah.
conversation, and to both of you, like two of my forever favorite folks, because we can always depend on each other. We can always reach out, and that is how we're going to get through. So
Yeah.
I appreciate all of it.
There's like a bunch of resources in the chat, including some contact information for Cait. And feel free to reach out to Matt for support. You know, sometimes these conversations bring things up too. And I'm by my friends today. So reach out, and we're here. All right. Sending everyone a lot of love and care, and look forward to getting together with Cait and Kay again soon in the near future.
Yeah.
Bye,
Thanks
everyone.
everyone who came, and thanks Hillary and Cait for inviting me. This has been awesome.
Thank you.